Also, let me share my screen real quick. So real quickly, I'm just gonna, I know that we've heard this a bunch of times throughout the day already, but just so the folks who watch these recordings later know who we are and why we're here. We're Synapse. We're a student-run organization dedicated to building brain injury awareness, advocacy, and resources. We hope to connect clinicians and researchers to the brain injury community because we believe that brain injury and brain injury communities are often devastatingly overlooked. We hope that through these talks, we can bridge connections as well as offer resources and understanding of the intricacies about our brains and how they operate. If you can, we do ask that you donate to help us in our goals for both Synapse and for Whitebird Clinic, local in Eugene, Oregon. I will put a little post in the chat box and it'll be linked in with the recordings as well if you do feel like you have funds to help support our cause. So now we're going to open the floor to our panel speakers who will be sharing about their lived experiences with brain injury. But before we begin, I wanted to introduce them to you first. So first we have Nancy. Nancy is a phenomenally honest, caring, and sensitive individual who came to our group because of her lifetime of experiences with brain injury. While her injury happened at the age of 3, she has experienced the effects of it for a very long time. And many of these effects are actually related to her experiences in trying to access care for her symptoms. Nancy has taught us so much in the time that we've gotten to know her. She's taught us how to listen, how to be patient, how to, and most importantly, I think the importance of exercising empathy in everything that we do. Jenna is an incredibly hardworking and dynamic woman. She's a professional, a mother, and a wife. This picture is of her with her husband from before her brain injury. And I just want to first point out that her husband is 6'1" and Jenna is 5'4". So that's a big guy to be kind of hoisting up over her shoulders. This is an example of what Jenna has shared with us as the strong and invincible woman she identified as before her brain injury. She has experienced many changes and challenges since then, and we'll share some of those with us today. We're so lucky to have her intelligence, her compassion, and her unique perspectives with us here. And finally, we have Ben. Ben is a tenacious and dedicated counselor, coach, author, and service worker. He came to our group after speaking at one of our previous webinars about his experiences with his brain injury and how he was able to tap into his strengths, as we've talked about. Those are very important. To find resilience through his recovery. Ben has taught us about the importance of valuing our differences because these unique strengths can be used as protective factors in our lives and throughout recovery. And then very lastly, I'm just gonna stop sharing real quick. We are gonna have these kind of be an open forum, but I wanna just say before I pass the mic over to Daniel, I'm gonna request that this portion of the talk today, that we hold our questions and comments until the end of the discussion, just because the experiences and thoughts of our, that our panelists are gonna be sharing with us are incredibly personal. And I wanna make sure that we give them the space to share those without feeling pressured to finish their thoughts really fast, you know? So we're going to ask questions and discuss these topics, give them space to share, and then in the end we'll have ample time to open the floor up to everybody else, because I know people are going to connect and feel very similarly or maybe differently, and they're going to want to ask questions. So we'll definitely save space for that. And then, yeah, Daniel, I'm going to hand the mic back off to you so you can start asking everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Anastasia. And yeah, that was a great introduction. Okay, so I'm just gonna put these questions out and well, one at a time, obviously. And I had sent these questions before to our panelists. And also these are questions I guess I've been thinking about for a long, long time. So the first question is, brain injury is invisible as it involves changes in our mind, feelings, and our inner self that others cannot see. These changes present themselves as symptoms, but often there is so much more happening underneath. And the specific questions are, have you experienced any issues like this that you would like to describe or share with the group and really with getting it out there to the public? And the second part of the question is, have you had any success or challenges in getting other people to understand these invisible symptoms and what's underneath that? So as I'm only speaking, I can't see if anyone wants to begin, please.
I'm willing to start if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Nancy.
In terms of strategies that work, I've been working out sort of phrases or things that I try to share or say, and they don't work most of the time so far. And I think it has a lot to do with other people and their openness. And so for me, my challenge is knowing when to share. But I've been working on this concept of a blind spot to describe an invisible injury. And that I want to know what y'all think, because this is a ever evolving short sort of thing. I might say, despite being smart, I have significant gaps in skill in areas that require no effort for most people. Brain injuries are full of tricky, unexpected blind spots that again are invisible. Please be patient and curious with me. I'm really not making this up. But if I were to talk about brain blind spots with a little more detail, I'd say blind spots are connections or regions in the brain without function. For me, these blind spots set me apart from others with full function or possibly different blind spots. I can't describe them because I don't have or experience these connections or functions. I may have never experienced them versus having had them and lost them. I simply know that what others tell me is easy is not. Because my first concussion was around 3, I likely developed without these connections or developed, compensating. Others can't seem to see my blind spots either, nor can they see or explain what it is that they can do that I cannot. These inabilities seem rather random. They don't diminish my intelligence. By contrast, the specific, transparent abilities of others become barriers for me. Sometimes I can work around, but with great effort, and this is accompanied by stress, fatigue, and sometimes lack of emotional resilience. To confound matters, when I have areas of brilliance, others can't seem to comprehend that I could have these basic inabilities or blind spots for things that are so effortless to them.
Thank you, very well put. And I love your use of the term blind spot. Nancy and I have spoken about this in various ways, because I know for me, I called it the holes, the things that were in my mind that were literally gone, or if I tried to do it, it wasn't there anymore. And I spent all my energy trying to gain it back. But Nancy and I have discussed this. If I was young and I didn't know what I lost, then it would be a blind spot. And it's no one ever understood what I was talking about either, so I feel what you're talking about, except I guess I was old enough to know what I had lost. So it's I think it's so strange how people just assume what they know is the way things are, which I guess is how all of us are, but I don't know, it puts this kind of problem into a very strange situation, because I don't even know how to deal with it, to be honest. I don't know anyone who does.
Ben, Jenna, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just that after I first had my injury, it took me a really long time even to discover what I was missing. I just felt like someone had taken a radio dial and just turned it to a slightly untuned station. Like I knew something was wrong. I had a feeling something was wrong, but I really couldn't connect the two. And I think that's something really important for me as I was trying to recover, is having like providers and people who surrounded me who had the idea, knowing that I wouldn't know what I needed. And so there was a situation where my mom, I was trying to drive a car, which I should have never been driving a car at the time. And I said, okay, I'll drive here. And I forgot the exit because I didn't have the cognitive functioning. So I drove past the exit and I turned around and then I drove past the exit again. And then I turned around and I drove past the exit again. And then I pulled over and said, I don't think I should drive today. But the thing is like learning where those holes were was really difficult. And so trying to reach out, everybody kept telling me like, you need to go on disability, you need to do this, you need to get this therapy, you go to that therapy. But my holes were such blind spots, I didn't even have the ability to make those connections. And that was one of the hardest part for me from my brain injury, trying to like get those skills and get that support. I didn't even have the skills to know what support I needed necessarily, because before I would have just driven myself. So I was having these like gaps that I wasn't even necessarily aware with. I would just have these major senses of confusion. And I knew when I felt confusion, there was something wrong, but I always had a hard time like putting my finger on it.
Yeah, the putting your finger on it, it doesn't exist before the brain injury. And I still haven't met anyone except for a small amount of therapists like Dr. Turkstra and a few people that, have spent their lives with it, that they can wrap their minds around it. They've seen this before. But yeah, I think it puts us in a very strange situation that I'm still, people just don't get it. It's also very frustrating. And I think with the blind spots and, restoring it or gaining sight of it it's either extremely difficult or impossible, in which case I think we adapt. But yeah, it's a very difficult scenario to be in. And I don't know how to get other people to understand it. In my experience, it's just been that they don't. And so I don't talk to them about it, or I keep it to myself, which I don't think is a good solution either.
Ben, did you want to add anything before?
Yeah, I do. I guess I was on mute before, but I right after Nancy was done speaking, I said, wow, that's brilliant. And that really just goes to show how eloquently we can talk about our struggles and how different that might seem to someone who looks at us and sees us with our struggles. But really, the way that I would answer that question is I take that the whole fact of blind spots and the idea that I struggle or there's difficulty in getting people to understand where I'm coming from. That's just kind of like the beginning. That's where I begin. That's an accepted place to begin. And it's also an sort of an intersection, because at that point in my recovery, I said, well, I'm going to stop listening to what other people tell me I need to do to get back to who I was or who they think I should be. And I'm going to carve my own path to becoming who I want to be and who I discover myself to be through my experience and through my recovery. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just read the first paragraph from my book, which I think spells it out very clearly. Those of us living with brain injuries reside in a different world than those without. The color of every rose petal, the prick of every thorn, the meaning of every word is pressed against a different, less forgiving backdrop of understanding. We struggle with these disparities. Invisible to the outside world, as we attempt to reestablish ourselves in a place that once seemed so familiar. At times, surrounded by obstacles and haunted by the possibility of failure, we feel tempted to turn away from our own desires and follow the path of least resistance, what others tell us to do. And so there was a point where I was just gonna say, there was a point where it just seemed like I was just sort of beating my head on a rock, trying to follow these things that people were telling me and saying this was my goal and this is what I wanted to do. And it just didn't seem to take into consideration how I understood myself and what I understood as, well, what success meant and who I saw myself becoming.
the becoming part, I think, well, first of all, I've read your book and I love particularly the first line of it. For me, vision and certain, things of smell, I didn't have changes in that, but I had drastic other changes. And so I kind of look at your perspective as more evolved, which I haven't gotten to that place yet. But I know that like with Nancy and with the holes that I have, when you hit something and you try to do it and you can't, or the blind spots blindside you, as Nancy has said to me in the past, it's so you don't know what to do, or I still don't know what the right thing to do is, but sometimes you're stuck in a place that you need to do what is being required or what people are expecting, and the inability is just it's both infuriating and I never was frozen. I was just stuck. I just didn't know what to do in all those cases. So I think to adopt your attitude would be a more evolved way of looking at it. And I don't know, maybe I'll get there.
Right. Daniel, can I add to that? You jogged my memory talking about the blind spots. I found those blind spots. I too was trapped in those blind spots and trapped in my head and struggling to figure out how to make myself understood by the world around me. And what I learned was that it was those blind spots. I could turn those blind spots into an opportunity to develop a greater sense of awareness of myself and the way I was doing things and how my thoughts connected to my actions, and breaking it down even further. So really those blind spots became opportunities to develop awareness.
Interesting. Nancy, what do you think of that? I know that in developing awareness, sometimes I don't know if we can. Hello?
If you're asking
Yeah.
me about that with awareness, it sounds so beautiful when Ben shares it. And I don't think I had that same experience, because I think I'm actually quite aware and I share it, and it's not met with receptivity. And I wish I could remain so optimistic as Ben. I'm trying so hard, I end up just using up all my resilience. And then I feel really defeated.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the previous talk of what I was able to gain from it. Our marbles, our resources can definitely get depleted, and especially when it's a lifetime of dealing with it. I don't know. I only hope that if we can get this information out, and I'm sure there's other people in this situation, that eventually people might understand better. I find that those who don't have a brain injury or any experience with it, they can't even fathom what we're dealing with. So then they don't even know how to think about it, and they're not cruel. They're not trying to be difficult, but it just what's automatic in them, it's never even questioned. It's never even there. The blind spot, what's blind in us, they can't even imagine it, so it just becomes such almost like you're talking to them, they can't hear you, they're talking to you, there's just no communication. And so yeah, it's a very difficult place to be. I unfortunately would say I haven't been able to get other people to understand either, and so I don't know.
Daniel,
maybe we can all work on
I can't see
Yeah.
see everybody's signals right now, but Jenna has something she wants to add.
Oh yeah.
I would just say that I've actually been really fortunate. In some ways, I went to counseling with my husband because I literally had a major transformation of who I was, like completely new person, like let the other person rest, and it was a really hard process. Luckily, I had a special counselor with my husband with, and she was a brain recovery kind of counselor. And so she had a really good understanding of kind of some of the things that I was going through and how that would affect our relationship. It was almost like we met each other again. It was very different. And I will say, like, I don't even necessarily see my blind spots sometimes. Sometimes, like, my blind spots just come out of like stress and me being frustrated or me being snappy. And my husband's done like this really amazing job of, he's like, hey, sometimes I forget you had a brain injury. Let me just put this off your plate for a second or whatever, because I can't be distracted. Like, I have to do one task at a time or I get really snippy and I lose track of what I'm doing, or like I'll burn something if someone distracts me with something else. It's very hard for me to stay on task and get back to task. Like, and so a lot of times it's like we use a term like broken record or whatever, but he just says, I forgot. And I'm like, okay, I like am able to emotionally step back and then be like, my marbles, I've lost my marbles. Like literally I lost my marbles. But like, I think that's been really helpful because I don't always see it in myself that I'm starting to like lose my inability to like express myself as I would if I started like my day fresh. And he's been able to just reiterate that for me in a really positive way that doesn't start an argument.
I think what you just described is also a good segue for the next question, which is
Daniel,
brain injury
can I just jump in? I want to clarify that when I was talking about the blind spots and awareness, I was talking specifically about our awareness of ourselves, which really has nothing to do with how we communicate with others.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess sometimes we get lost or caught in the world with others, and I'm trying to develop that awareness as well. And so thank you for clarifying. Moving on to the next question, which I'll be happy, for everyone to participate in, and what Jenna was saying about the before and after. Like for our partners, they don't know what it's like, what the change is in us, but the before and after shapes our life in so many ways. And I think brain injury is very unique in that sense. I actually look at it as there's a term neurodiverse and neurotypical that's been used in certain literature. I think that with a brain injury, we're neurodiverse from ourselves. And I was just wondering if you guys have found any ways to deal with that issue. Jenna, what you shared about getting the right therapist to help you with your partner, I think that's really good. And I don't know if there's anyone else that wanted to share about that.
I'm a little confused about the question, Daniel.
Oh, well, the question is simply, as we have had a brain injury and we're different from who we were, how do you deal with that? Or how have you found ways to deal with that? I know for me, I hid from what had changed and I tried to deny it for a long, long time. Right. So, the neurodiversity term, I just kind of thought about that within this talk, but the basic idea is how we shape ourselves or how we change so much. Right. Yeah. How do you deal with that, or how have you found ways to deal with it?
Well, from me, I guess I'm going to just mimic what I said the first time. There was a point where I left that path of trying to be what others thought I should be and the goals other people were setting for myself. And I embraced the fact that I was becoming who I was going to be. And once I had accepted, or I say that so quickly, much easier said than done. After years and years of working to accept myself for who I am, I have, I've built a beautiful life now for myself as that person.
I like the flow of that, especially in the sense that just letting go. I know for me, I was stuck in kind of the life plan I had before my brain injury, and I had to do everything to claw and scratch to get that back, but it was never the same. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and obviously it's not a difficult shift to make. It's not difficult. It's very difficult to just accept, let it flow or let it go. And I know Nancy and I have discussed, I'm not going to speak for you, Nancy, but the age where you have a brain injury, it shapes you, especially if you have it very young. I think that there's probably a good population out there that have it at such a young age that there isn't really a before your brain injury, or at least who you were. It was such a, you were still in early development. If you wanted to say anything about that, Nancy, and if not, we can totally move forward.
Well, what I would share would be very short because of what's true, what you just said, that I don't have a clear before and after, but I can look back and realize that I got injured a lot as an active child playing in the woods and an athlete. And then even just a few years ago, when I slipped on the ice and woke up with my dog licking my face, I haven't even fully recovered from that. So I have a little taste of that, but according to one of those other slides, I'm in my decline, which I don't really want to focus on.
And Jenna had something she wanted to share, Daniel, before you move on.
Please.
I was just gonna say, for me, the process is a total like recreating of who I was, like into someone new. Like I went and challenged myself to do new skills, and I had to let go the person I was before. And I think being like my job was an athlete, like, and having that be my everything, like every moment of every day, to switching to being like, I can't do extreme sports. Like I can't take another head injury. I had so many before my final big blow. I now know, like, I don't want to end up like going back to speech therapy, not being able to talk again, or not knowing how to use a microwave. Like I've been there, I've been through that recovery to the extreme. And so having to like set aside like 15 years of physical activity and martial arts and that identity, that was like a very, it was a very big, almost like a memorial, like a burying of a human. And I literally had to cut off a lot of people in my life because I just couldn't even face like the images of myself. So there was like a very sad process of like rebirth. But when the rebirth happened and then I started challenging myself, like there became like some really amazing stuff. I think we're going to talk some of those later, but it was a very hard process. And I wouldn't say it's easy, and having that guidance and the support has really been helpful.
Yeah, and I think also, especially the way you described it there, it's obviously the healthy choice. I know people who stay, especially in certain sports, and the damage just builds, and it's definitely not the healthy decision. Let's
Daniel,
move on to the next question. Yes.
I have a question. Do you guys have space
Please.
for if somebody had a comment right now before we move on to the next question, or should we hold them until the very end?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't see what's on the screen, but yeah, please ask it.
Jan, did I say your name right? I saw that you had your hand raised
Yes.
for a while.
Yes, Patty Ann. I agree, and I think I had an accident in my 30s, or actually it was later than that, my 40s, car accident, and then became very, physically limited and had to recover from a pretty significant concussion. And I went through a grief process of the physical limitations and the things that got taken from me that way. And I think it was really a grieving process and a loss. But once I came in time to the acceptance of what my life looked like now, which people were trying to force on me early and I wasn't ready. Telling me now I can no longer snow ski, I can no longer water ski, I shouldn't do anything that could bump my head again, those kinds of things. And also trying to be a mom and be active with my kids, it was super difficult. But once I kind of accepted, and it took a while, where I was at, and tried to more so radically accept this is my new reality, and then embrace the what I had overcome. At the beginning, I would go, I was told I had a pretty high functioning brain before, but I would go to the grocery store and I would start crying because I couldn't remember 2 items. And it was my challenge for the day to remember the 2 things I wanted to get from the store. And I would only maybe remember 1. And then I couldn't choose between them, and I would start crying and then just leave the store with nothing. And, you know, I've regained a lot of that back in time. But one thing I was also going to mention is I haven't heard anyone mention EMDR. And I was wondering if anyone's kind of tried that and been assisted by that as far as brain injury and EMDR. It's a type of therapy that I heard of.
I can say that I tried it with 3 separate practitioners, and it was not useful for me. There is another extension of it that's called brain spotting for those that it doesn't work for as well. And again, I've been sort of an anomaly with this therapist who's very experienced and keeps saying, whoa, that's never happened before with anyone, you know. And so I've heard great things about it, but it just wasn't my experience.
For me, the only thing that worked, which also was, oh, go ahead, man.
I was just gonna say, I've had 2 EMDR sessions, and I found them extremely helpful, but that was in dealing with emotional trauma that had nothing to do with my brain injury. So, you know, take that for what it is.
What is EMDR? Ben?
EMDR is it's a practice, what is it? Electromagnetic, or no, eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
That's
So
right.
what it whether it's a sound or a light or a whatever it's doing, it
I think I understand.
yeah, okay.
Heard this before. Yeah, I just didn't ever.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing. Daniel, I don't know if you wanted to, it's about halfway through, so if you wanted to go to question.
Sure. Let's go to the next question. I think this question is very important. How has the brain injury support groups, how has that been for you all? And I just want to share that it's been huge for me, because for me, there was a long time where I was hiding what happened. And it's funny, because I guess I convinced myself that I was normal or recovered enough, but I also never dealt with the emotional stuff of everything that happened. And all of that came out when I decided to get out of my career, which was separate from my brain injury. And then it all came flooding out, and the TBI groups and just talking to people who actually know or can relate with what I've been through has been a huge support. And I don't know how, if I would have done it without that, I've been able to share with my family and share with the people who really, when I grew up and after my injury, they didn't really understand what I was dealing with. And I met my wife years after my injury, and I think she's understood it as much as she can, but you know, you don't get it if you haven't been through it. And so I've enjoyed the support groups very much, and I hope to at least have that part in my life for many years to come. So anyone else want to share about the group?
I think it's been, I don't know quite how to describe it, but I just found them, I don't know, I'm always here, so I don't know quite how to describe it. I don't know how to quite describe what they've done.
Helpful or not?
Yeah, but I don't know how to, I'm not quite really sure how to articulate any of that.
I think Jenna wants to say something about it.
Okay.
Please.
So my feeling with support group is a lot of times, like when I go to like a neurologist or a psychologist, there's this bridge and gap that's missing. The psychologist maybe wants to talk about past trauma, and maybe that my brain injury, like I've had neurologists say, oh, your brain should be healed like by now. And I've had psychologists like, oh, your trauma. And I feel like there's this part of it's disconnecting in the world right now between of what kind of trauma actually for what kind of brain injury. And for me, I know when I have a lot of stress, like my symptoms are definitely harder, but is that because of like some type of, I don't know, this conversation earlier was really like mind blowing, honestly. I couldn't even keep up. But like, is it my cells are like wiggling some different pathway? I don't know. Some little triangle isn't connecting. I'm not entirely certain like what's going on with my brain after so many injuries. But I will say, like in the support group, that triangle is happening. It's that because I go to the neurologist, I can go to that counselor who doesn't really understand, they've never been there. And then I go to the support group. And I think what's also amazing is having this specific support group, because we actually have brain scientists in it. Like people who actually, we can say like, I don't know, I got hit in my left frontal lobe, you know, like the last time, but they actually understand. And I think that was one of the hard things going to like a neurologist when I was like, I got rung. And they said, what's wrong? I'm like, well, apparently you've never boxed before. You get rung, you get kind of dizzy. I don't know, 1.5 times a rung, you know, you're still standing, don't pass out, but you're kind of out of it a little. And so like when you say that to these different groups and through the support group, I think people understand that a lot better. Like, and the time to explain it. Like when you're at a doctor's appointment, it's a few minutes. And honestly, with psychologists, I feel like I've had all the trauma in my life before I hit my head, lots of trauma. But the thing is like, I never had these symptoms before. And so I feel like there's a lot of like, neurologists want to tell me because of my trauma, I'm having these symptoms because of PTSD. But at the same time, as I was diagnosed with PTSD before I had an injury and I didn't have any symptoms. And so I feel like the only people who really get that is people in the support group at this time, and they make that link.
Yeah, that I mean, there's many different types of traumas, and I don't want to pitch my talk, but that the concept that I was trying to bring up of the core problems after a brain injury, it's very different when the physical, you know, the neuronal substrates that are creating what is in us, when those things are damaged, it's very different from anything else. And I found no one ever understood what I was dealing with, so I shut up about it, and I put my, you know, I'm good at being like an ostrich. I put my head in the sand and dealt with my own problems and was able to recover and restore at least the cognition and memory. But only once I actually went to the groups did I meet people, and I was shocked to meet people that kind of dealt with what I had been through, and it immediately everything just came back, like it like flooded back into me, and I was very happy for that opportunity. And I've been to 3 different groups, one in person, for a shorter amount of time before COVID, and now the Synapse, both at U of O and at University of Washington, and it's just it's generally the same connection with these people. So I'm very happy for the support groups for being there. Anyone else want to share?
Yes. Oh, sorry, Ben. Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll share. So, you know, I just discovered Synapse very recently. I never had the fortune of support groups through my recovery. But I do want to share. So after my recovery, you know, I was stuck with my brain injury, stuck with my blind spots. I wrote my book. I was into all this, but I couldn't find that brain injury population. I couldn't find that brain injury audience. And so I shifted into mental health and started life coaching in mental health. I'm now a licensed professional counselor, doing a lot of work in mental health. But even through that, through my 20s, I was very active in the, I guess, activist advocacy movement for progressive change in mental health care. And so I'd go to these conferences and do different workshops and this and that. And what I found is when I'd go to these conferences and I'd go to these workshops and I'd be with other people that had experienced similar challenges, I was able to talk about my challenges from a place of pride. And that was really maybe the first time that I really experienced, wow, this is something that makes me awesome, you know, makes me unique, makes me, awesome. And so I really was able to understand my challenges from a different perspective.
That's nice. That I think that attitude is, I wish I had more of that, and I'm trying to develop it, you know, that positive perspective of yourself. Nancy, did you want to say something?
Yes, what I would say is, I mean, I love what this group has brought for me, and a lot of it's similar to what Jenna shared in terms of it's sort of a grounding rod or a place to get some support for experiences that end up being, you know, like medical trauma. For me, the piece that's been profound that's different is that all my life with my early injury, I didn't think of any of my vulnerabilities that led to chronic infections and illness as related, because
Mhm.
I never even looked at it. So this has been just a really important platform for me to explore it and to see that in fact it is probably one of my deepest root causes that opened me to the vulnerability for the other things. So anyway, I'm pretty appreciative. So thank you.
And
Yeah,
actually,
and that makes sense, especially with the kind of enigmatic nature of brain injury, because I'll never know what it would have been like without it, but there's a lot of mystery into what else might have changed in us that we're not even aware of. And with that, I'm going to go to the last question. So I
can I,
thought
can I,
about this a lot.
can I
Yeah,
say
yeah,
something real quick?
yes.
The first thing is that I think I want to restate what I said earlier. And I think that
You
Jenna,
have permission.
I think that what Jenna said, Ben, Jenna, and Nancy pretty much all touched upon. I would concur with everything that the three of them said. Let me just leave it at that. When this injury happened, we barely knew anybody here. Actually, we didn't know anybody here. And the only thing that was of any value in terms of rehab was really the U of O, which I spent 3 or 4 years. I mean, Laurie, you were, hi Laurie, by the way. She was the clinical supervisor. She knows what I was like. I'm not sure how much of it I remember, but the rest of it really came from being married to an incredible individual, acupuncture, 2 golden retrievers, Tai Chi, and table tennis. It wasn't anything that came out of Western clinical medicine. The only other thing I guess that would be the antidepressants, the SSRIs. And at this point, the choice between having fits of depression or walking around as a zombie, I don't know what the hell the difference is, so I'm not bothering. And I don't give that much credence to clinical Western clinical medicine anymore, given my experience. We had no support of any kind. Nancy, I think you said it pretty well, that there is you and Jenna both, there is a cohesion that seems to come in this group that I don't know where else it could be found. And you're right, there was no, you go to talk to anybody about this when you're sitting there talking to, whether it's a doctor, a neighbor on the street, you're talking to somebody about this stuff, and they're looking at you, listening to you articulate what it is that ever you're saying, regardless of how well or poorly you're articulating it. And they don't understand how you can say what you're saying when in fact they're looking at you and hey, you look perfectly okay. What's the problem?
It's invisible to them. And,
you have
I think
24/7, the rest of your life, navigating the world.
Right.
I want to say something to that, Randy. That is so true, the invisibleness, because I remember the first time I actually walked into brain rehab. I was at the downtown clinic at Sacred Heart for rehabilitation, and I showed up and they thought I was a sales rep for pharmaceuticals or something, and they tried to shuffle me somewhere else. And once I was trying to talk and stuttering really bad, they realized actually I was here to be a patient. But because of my confusion, I wasn't even really able to get myself to the right place. But it took a while for both of us to kind of catch on. But I think that invisibility is something really hard. And I think that's something that's really hard for the medical professionals to understand, is that we might look totally fine. We might talk like totally fine, but there's parts of us that are still struggling, and to figure that out.
A lot more than just the medical profession, the entire legal system.
well, I think people without a brain injury, because they don't even understand it. It's all the stuff that is automatic in them. For us, it has been, torn apart or just removed. Yeah.
And what we're learning more and more from science and functional medicine and neurology is how important a sense of connection is. And to not have that sense of connection just depletes every other mechanism, every other network within us. And so when we can go to a group and we can feel that connection, when we can identify our experience with others and see a relatedness there, that instantly like gives our entire self a boost.
I think so. I think that's the nature of support groups, and I cannot speak for others, but other groups like veterans, or who knows what other groups are out there, but they're definitely, it's a human factor, it's a human connection, and I'm glad we're all on the same page in that respect. The last question, and I think Randy kind of brought it up, and I've always thought about it, is that since my brain injury, I've had to manage myself very differently. And by that, I mean, I know what my capacities are. I know how I can drain my resources. And especially in the first 7 years when I was really in the cognitive and memory recovery, I could get so frustrated. And if I pushed myself enough, I would blank out. I would be completely fatigued and need to just lay down for, I don't know how long, nights, days. So I was wondering how you guys have learned, if any, ways to manage yourselves. If you have any recommendations or tips and tricks. I think especially for people who have had a brain injury within the recent, in those first year or two, it's such a bizarre experience, but as I think we all learned, it stays with us for the rest of our lives. So any recommendations on how you manage yourself?
What I'm working on, again, like I said earlier, is what I might interject or preface a conversation with. And I have trouble whether it's a long, difficult, emotional conversation with someone, or whether I'm calling on the telephone for some information, because somehow I don't speak the same language of the other person. So one of the things I'm working on, like when it's going to be a conversation that's one-on-one, before we start, I want to thank you in advance for your patience with me. I have an invisible brain injury, and often people don't see how hard I'm working to understand and be understood. At some point, my brain might get fatigued without warning. The tone of my voice may change with overwhelm and frustration. People often assume that I'm angry when in fact I'm struggling. And then I have other ideas of other things I might say to follow up, like what might help, that I need them to be direct and clear and listen and attempt to answer the question I asked. And I don't get to say it this way, but like instead of the answer you usually give, which isn't the question I asked, because that gets people kind of irritated. So anyway, I'm working on all these phrases. And at the end, after everyone goes, if you want, I wrote down 5 foolproof requests that would really help when interacting with me.
So these are requests or terms and ways you phrase things that help others understand what you're asking for, or what you're trying to communicate.
All I can say is I'm working on some communication strategies, and so far it's not going very well, but I'm working on it still.
Yeah, I could definitely use that. I know that for me, I often ask questions that most people don't even think it's a question that is important. And I know other people in the group have definitely said the same thing. And for me, it's like, just answer the question, please, and then things will make sense in my mind. And I could get better at communicating my needs, or the ways I think, which are different from the people I've met in the past. Yeah, that's a good to develop such strategies. I hope it works. I hope you can find ways to advance that. Jenna, Ben, anyone else, anything to share about
well,
managing yourself?
I think that what Nancy's talking about is a great example of what Dr. Lin talked about as far as being able to advocate for ourselves. But a big piece of that, I think, and the way I would answer that question, the most important thing is stop beating yourself up. Be able to advocate for yourself, but also don't feel bad about having to ask for those accommodations. So in short, stop beating yourself up, accept where you are, and embrace the process. I want to say a little thing. I saw the picture of Jenna in martial arts. Martial arts was a huge part of my own recovery, as far as just turning my mind from these are my limitations to, well, this is where I'm at right now. If I work hard and practice and train, I can, you know, achieve whatever I want to achieve. And so just embracing the process has been huge for me. And that, I mean, that's really become a lens that I view my life through, that I view my life and my challenges through as, okay, this is where I'm starting out. I'm not going to beat myself up for it, but now let's figure out how to move forward.
Jenna?
That's well said.
Jenna has
So I think for me, one of the things that really helped was actually Dan Avesar when I first met him, and having somebody and having someone like a mentor who you've seen go through these processes and says it can get better. Because there is those really dark times. I laid on the couch and just decided I was going to die. I mean, I couldn't get off the couch, like losing everything. And so, and right after my brain injury, I actually got in a car wreck. So I lost the use of my leg also. So it was a really hard time for me at that point. And watching Dan and seeing like what other people had achieved gave me some hope that like, hey, even if I can't achieve this anymore, there's something different. And so I challenged myself like in a New Year's challenge, like every day to try something new. Now it took me a couple of years to get to that point, but like I challenged myself. I did woodworking. I went snowshoeing for the first time. It was like 3 years later. I backed up a boat trailer because I always thought I'm going to take the boat out, but I don't know how to back up this thing down the ramp. And so even if they were little things, I just started challenging myself to see what new things can I do with my brain that I've never tried before. And that was really amazing because there was a point where I kept focusing on the things I couldn't do. I can't cook anymore. I can't remember that I even have a calendar anymore, to remember to remind myself that I have a calendar. That was just frustrating. And it felt like through time, it really helped. And for now, some of the strategies that I personally use, going back to work, that's been definitely a struggle, but I'm working half time, which is great. I work remotely, which is great, so I can control my environment. I can take a nap. I have flex schedule. So if I feel like working at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, like as long as it gets done, that has been really great for my mind because I do get really overwhelmed. In fact, today I had another seminar before this and I'm feeling just crashed. I was like, why did I plan 2 seminars in a day? Like this is not good. And then also professionally, I found I love Airtable. Like Airtable has been something amazing for me to stay organized in my life. And syncing it with like my Google Calendar. I actually keep all my emails and my conversations there so I can multitask because I lost that ability to multitask. I have about a zillion timers everywhere that I lose and forget why they went off. But Airtable is great for me because I can go back and catalog and kind of micromanage like my own, it's like my brain visually. And a lot of times I'll do a project and I don't even remember that I did the project. Honestly, I'm like, I did that? Like, gosh, that was like maybe a month ago. Totally forgot about it. But being able to have like this data record of what's going on in my life and the conversations so I don't drop the ball has been really helpful. It took a long time to get there. Like I said, when I first started rehab therapy, we'd start with like, okay, just put this on your calendar if you do this. And then I'd go back to therapy and they'd be like, okay, how's your calendar working? I was like, oh yeah, I had a calendar. And so that's been a really long process. And even now my visual calendars, my husband's my accountability partner. And he's like, hey, Jenna, remember we had that calendar on the wall that you're supposed to look at every morning? So I think that having that accountability partners there, having the mentorship kind of relationship in Synapse has been really helpful. And also learning that my mind doesn't have to hold the information. There's a lot of apps out there that will do that for you. And so kind of just letting that control go.
What is Airtable?
It's like a really cool spreadsheet.
Daniel, before you move on, I
Yes.
just wanted to point out that Patian gave us some tips as well. She says, my management tips: good sleep and nutrition, challenge my weaknesses, be kind to self, and try to stay educated.
Yeah, I think those are all very important. I'm working on the be kind to self, and I know that you know, in I can't even put the timeline on it, but for the many years after my brain injury and not meeting anyone that was in the same situation as me, I kind of thought I was like on a different planet or just dealing with these problems that no one had dealt with. They are unique, like other brain injuries, but the more I, you know, learn how to manage myself and kind of gain a emotional center and be kind to myself, I guess is the actually it's not self-judge, because I think my default is tremendous self-judgment. But as I dealt with these things and I speak to other people who are dealing with the same kinds of things post brain injury, I realized how human all these problems are, because other people are dealing with these things too. It's just we have the asterisks of the brain injury and the life after a brain injury that I think does make it at least somewhat unique, or at least you know, it has a very different flavor. So I thank you guys for being so open and talking about what you have had to deal with. And you know, I'm also trying to learn these kinds of things now. After my brain injury, I was in this like sort of pushing myself and needing to recover state, and all the emotional stuff didn't come out until the last few years when my son was born, and when I just kind of became emotionally vulnerable, I guess, as a father. And so I've revisited a lot of that stuff, had the grief of my brain injury like 18 years after my brain injury. And I guess that also helped me to try to want to talk to people and, you know, I guess do something about it. So anyone else want to say anything? Because I think we're at about an hour, and I think this has been a really great discussion.
I think I would just add, oh, sorry.
Just real
Yeah.
quickly, Daniel, what you were just saying right there takes me back to, again, the quote that someone shared here: the edge of comfort is where the most learning can take place.
Yes.
That's our brain injury. Our brain injury has placed us on that edge of comfort.
And for me, though, it was to regain the cognition and the memory and to push myself, whatever, to be, you know, fill in the blank. But it was always cognition, memory, achievement. It was never the emotional aspect. It was never the being kind to myself aspect. So that shift in me, I think it's who I was before my brain injury. I was a young man who didn't, you know, I guess like some other guys, I never got into the emotional aspects anyway. So that all came out. So, you know, because you can keep pushing that boundary to become the best, whatever, mechanic, the best plumber, the best scientist, or the best salesman. But yeah, taking that shift into the emotional realm, that's been the more untouched frontier for me that I've only gone into the last few years. And also with that, letting go of the self-judgment. So yeah, it's a beautiful quote. I also, who said that? Dr. Turkster, right? And she was quoting Vygotsky.
It was
yeah.
Jenna.
But yeah,
shared
it's a great quote.
Jenna shared it, right? Jenna?
Yeah.
I guess we all, I don't know about you guys, my memory is not the best. But somebody said it, and yes, it is a great thing to live by.
Do we want to maybe open the floor now for any kind of question and answer that anybody had for our panelists?
I thought Jenna had something to say. Her and I started talking at the same time.
Yeah, sorry,
And I
Jenna.
kind of pushed.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, to me, a lot of this comes to be like how I'm listening to Dan talk about when he has kids, something else changes. And I'll tell you, like, I used to think I was gonna be a professional snowboarder. I took a lot of falls, my pre-life doing that too. Big air broke my arm. Like, so I understand, like, but for me, it's almost like a death of a loved one, where there's a point where it's really hard and then you get over it. But every so often that holiday or that song or something's going to happen and you're going to revisit that. And so I think that's why it's important to be part of a support group, because you don't know exactly at what point in your life you're going to be revisiting those cycles, and having people who understand that loss of self is a long-term thing. And even if 90% of the days you're having great days, there's going to be some of those days that you're going to have a hard one again. And that's just, I think, emotional reality of having one of those tragic events in your life.
Yeah, I think it's the nature of grief, and I've seen it in different forms, but yeah, for me with the brain injury, I was in like a very different place for close to 20 years, and then it was like an emotional flood. It actually, the emotional stuff was so much harder than the just fixing my cognition and just focusing on my memory and these parts of me, because those other things were devoid of the emotional aspect. And yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jenna.
I wanted to.
Let's open the floor. Who wants to say anything?
I do. Before question and answer, I just wanted to say, as Nancy's putting her requests out, which I've seen them before, and I just appreciate them, and I want to bring some focus to them for a second. And I just want to say, a lot of what you guys are sharing about, there's your blind spots, but a lot of your experiences I'm noticing too are, and I'm going to speak for the neurotypical community, there are blind spots. And I just want to say that always continue advocating for your needs and your boundaries. These requests that Nancy is putting out here are going to be beneficial to her for sure, but they teach us how to be better humans, no matter what, whether it's to an individual who's speaking to me with brain injury or to anybody. And so it doesn't hurt to always just open our awareness and our perspectives and listen to each other's needs. So thank you, Nancy, for sharing that. All right, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the non-brain injured can learn that aspect, and the more I've gotten to know other people and just, I guess, let go of the I don't know what I was holding in myself, but I realized how much these are just human problems and in a different form. So thanks for saying what you just said. Please, who's next? Any questions?
I'd like to ask a question, and that is, there's lots of intersections to it, but the power differential that exists in our system of care between medical and rehab providers and people who are experiencing that system, to me, it sets up so much of the disconnects that can happen, and the fact that the kinds of supports that have been described here aren't thought of by those providers right away. Let's get your rehab therapies going. Let's get these things going. And there is consideration of support groups, but it feels like an afterthought. And I'm kind of playing the devil's advocate here for the system, because I've been part of that as a speech pathologist myself. So I just wonder, how can that change? What are ways, through, what if maybe you've had already physicians who've sat in on these meetings just to listen, just to listen, there's so many levels to this, how is this being, this sort of person-centered, human-centered, empowerment building way of thinking being baked into medical education, rehab physicians, counseling, psychology, all of that. So it's a very broad brush I'm painting with here, but it feels really important to acknowledge that. So probably all of you could have used this group way sooner. I'm hearing that, but, so I'm just kind of going off here, but I'd love any comments to anything I've just said.
I think that your general paintbrush is on point, and it's something that I don't know how to deal with it either. And I've been listening to a lot more of the blogs and podcasts by other brain injury survivors, and I'm going to try to make my own and somehow try to get that lack and that, because as a patient, as a neuroscientist, I went back after I got my PhD in neuroscience. I went back to school to try to do a clinical degree, and they didn't understand what I was saying at all. And I'm like, I had the brain injury and I recovered. I'm not speaking. This isn't just a opinion that is unfounded. So yeah, it's missing, and I don't know how to correct it. But I'm hoping that with enough talk, with enough somehow getting it into the zeitgeist, and I've had this discussion with Nancy and I think with Jenna. There are doctors that get it, and so hopefully we can get somehow the information to slowly dissipate. I think about PTSD 100 years ago when the first phenomenons were happening in World War I. You got shot. That was the end of that. So it took 100 years for that one to change and for people to understand what's happening. Let's try to do this faster. But yeah, I don't know how to change it. I know that I'm just going to try to talk to people about it, and that's why we're having this seminar and promoting other forums and somehow getting people to get it. I think would be great. For me, it's been very, very difficult. For example, I don't feel like my family still understands. I hope that they'll listen to this, but without a brain injury, you just don't get it. So I don't know. It's definitely a hurdle to climb, and I see us all in this challenge together. So
I think
thanks for
Jenna wants to.
recognizing that. Yeah, please.
This one definitely means a lot to me because I really struggled to get help after my brain injury. Like you go to the ER and then after that, they tell you to outsource to different places. When you're brain injured, it's hard for me to remember how to use a phone. Like I can't use the microwave. Like I get all this like you should do's, but I was like, I don't even know how to get there. So I made myself an appointment for physical therapy. I was so out of it. I made myself for literally physical therapy, not mental physical therapy. And so they had me doing squats and I'm like, my legs are fine. Like, and so I think one of what I would like to see in the community is like having a pamphlet for the ER docs. Hey, if you're going through this, this is a family support plan, because guess what? When you're brain injured, you're not thinking clear. Like they were telling me what to do. They weren't like saying you need an accountability partner. Hey, we have a nurse who's going to follow up and we'd like you to follow up with you at this time. Like, I think there's a systematic problem that they're processing people with brain injuries the same way they're processing people with broken legs. And the person with broken leg, they're going to show up to their follow-up. Like, I didn't even know where I was. And like, this town that I'm living in has multiple neurologists of places. They're both named similar and they're in the same building. And I was so lost and so confused and I couldn't remember how to call their numbers. I can't tell you how much confusion was in my life trying to access resources. And I mean, it shouldn't be very hard to figure out where the brain places are in town. Like most people didn't even know downtown Eugene had a rehab therapy. Like the doctors didn't know, like my friends didn't know, people in this group mostly didn't know. Like if you're brain injured, it's really hard to figure that out. And so I think starting with like, you know, the emergency department having like a general, here's a pamphlet and we'll give you a call later, to having your general practitioners have an idea of what you do, because a lot of physical things, you're going to know what to do. Brain injuries, you can't take that control for yourself. And because you can't necessarily express like and find all those holes in yourself, like I was still driving, very bad choice, but I didn't even know I shouldn't drive, right? I think that that's where it really breaks down in our medical system, is not having that first step.
Thank you.
Beautiful share, Jenna. Thank you for that. That's so important. And even me, who works really hard to communicate, I live alone. Well, with my dog, but he doesn't make appointments for me and he doesn't advocate for me. And it's been a struggle to even find anyone who can be an accountability partner that you talk about.
Laurie?
I've had two discussions. I just want to say one thing. I've had two discussions with two neurologists and two psychologists that are my friends. And one's an MD PhD, we're in the same PhD program, but otherwise, I kind of watched them since college get their degrees and become professionals. And I always kept quiet about this stuff. But then when I tried to talk to them about it, literally, I could not have the discussions with them. I think because in psychology, the mind stuff is a black box, and in neuroscience, it's like, I was giving my friend this explanation of kind of how I had changed in my recovery, and immediately it went to, you can't say that, you can't talk about that, you can't talk about the mind that way. It's a slippery, it's something entrenched in the clinical and I guess medical world where these things, what changes in us, they don't even know that that's happening, and for some reason they can't talk about it. And the last discussion I had with the psychologist about it, I'm like, okay, like this is how these people are. So I can't even talk to them about it. And that's why I invited scientists. I didn't invite except for Dr. Trester, because he's the first person I heard that I'm like, yes, this guy gets it. And I don't know if, I mean, that discussion was recorded, but I think he's very well aware that most of the people in his field don't even understand what's going on. Sorry. So
yeah. Quickly, I think one of like even the talks that Siebert has put out with, we've talked about Caitlin Sinovic and then like how much she acknowledges that even just screening for brain injury is so disparate throughout the medical and psychological communities. And it's like, first step, understand that it's a lot more prevalent than folks give it credit for, and then address that the changes are a lot more prevalent than folks give it credit for. And we all know that a patient and practitioner connection is key to anybody's healing, whether that's chronic illness or disability or injury. So just, I think it's about just like giving space to understand
Right.
each other.
I think that
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, and to follow up your comment, Anastasia, or some of the other ones, is often the brain injury is just pushed into mental health and not getting the care for the right problem.
But that's precisely like one of the problems, because what, like, you know, brain injury does change how like any mental health issues express themselves. It's a comorbid condition, not all one condition. And so, and not knowing that, I think it changes possible.
And I'm hoping that you can also talk about Whitebird, since we're supposedly raising money for them, what they know about brain injury versus mental health. I mean, I would be afraid to call them.
Whitebird, so specifically, they are kind of more of what we're talking about in like a patient and person centered work. They do outpatient stuff, they do clinical work. They also are folks who you would generally call if you're having kind of, you know, any kind of mental health, or by mental, I don't mean just psychological, like any kind of mental health concerns at the moment. You'd call them knowing that who wouldn't be just kind of pulling you away to a psychiatric ward, would be there to address your needs and everything that you're going through at the moment based on your specific, like what you're saying. If you were having this kind of break and you called them and you're having an emergency, you would be able to say, I have this going on. They would take that into consideration, address that, as opposed to just being like, this person's having like a psychiatric issue, we need to put them in a psychiatric care place right now. So that's specifically why I really appreciate Whitebird's work, because I think they do kind of take a little bit more well-rounded perspective in how they treat situations, and they're very affordable. They're very open to any kind of anybody who needs care. And Lori, like you might know a little bit. If you want to add something?
Yeah, I think thank you for mentioning that. Whitebird and Cahoots, they're, you know, they when we were disseminating information about the webinars that Dr. Sinovic is doing on screening and accommodating brain injury among vulnerable and at-risk populations, that flyer was sent to them specifically, and they were really open to it because they are on the front lines, and to have brain injury is a possibility for why someone might be struggling. While they may not be providing rehab per se, it'll be that first entry point potentially for a lot of folks where maybe it wouldn't have been considered at all in the first place. So, and as Anastasia mentioned, there's a higher prevalence of brain injury among people who are homeless. There's a high elevation of it among people in corrections. You know, there's these, you know, it's, so that's the space Whitebird and Cahoots are working in often. People maybe have come out of the correction system, you know, it's just really, there's a lot there. So I appreciate that you have invited them as a focus for your fundraising efforts. And it's certainly part of what's sitting with us very strongly at Siebert to try to do what we can with the funding streams that we have to elevate awareness and to support training, including Caitlin's webinar, which is coming up next Wednesday, if you're interested. Just a little pitch there, it's free. So.
Ben's been holding his finger up for quite a while.
Oh, it's all good. And yes, Whitebird, I forget what it was for, but you know, they were in the national papers as far as like a new healthcare model. And, you know, building on that, we are, since the 60s or 70s, like mental health care, disability rights, like that is a new, so, you know, civil rights movement. And there is a lot of work moving towards client-centered care, patient-centered care, you know, peer support specialists in the mental health realm. So in the big picture, I think our society is moving in that direction, towards really listening to each person's experience and really trying to value the uniqueness of each and help them find the accommodations that they know that they need.
I hope so. I think from my experience, which was in early, 1999, 2000, I got reminded of the same problems, 17, 18 years later. But I hope that it is changing, and that's good to hear that it is. I think that perhaps some other mechanisms need to be in place, because brain injury recovery is not a short-term process. And I know that's the way a lot of therapists are limited by insurance and limited by the resources that are out there. I don't know what needs to be created, but maybe something a little bit different that would be longer lasting and maybe involves a support group kind of format, along with clinical help and along with reinforcement of building the right skills at home. And getting into the things that are difficult for us is the best way to build those skills back. I walk away from this seminar, thinking that's true, or, reaffirming that I think that's true. So maybe there's new resources that can be developed for brain injury specifically in the future.
I say something. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. I say something.
We can hear me. Oh, sorry. I hope no one's heard my typing. I was responding to the chat. Go ahead, Randy. I'm muting.
I don't remember exactly what year it was, Lori, but I came by your house and I showed you a copy of a treatise that was accepted for peer review by Health Affairs Journal. Remember that? It wasn't published because I couldn't cut it down to the 5,000 word limit. And you said something to me at that time which really stuck. And that was, I already got my reward. Meaning that the work that I did on writing that treatise, the health model, the financing model was done before I got injured. But all that writing afterwards ended up being phenomenal rehab for me.
Mm-hmm.
All the, you saw the letter. I think I know I sent it to Anastasia and I think to you after you guys had that lawyer on here that set me off. The letter that went to Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General at the time, concerning the Oregon State Bar. That went on over 10 years. I know a lot about the, quote, system, if you will, healthcare, insurance, all that, government, all that stuff. I can't even begin to fathom what it's like for anybody else trying to navigate this shit, especially when I consider the crap that I've had to deal with going through it, knowing what I know. So in terms of answering the question that you raised, a lot of this stuff can be fixed. And I'm not, how do I put this? I don't want to sound like I'm not saying this to blow hot air up my own skirt. A lot of the work that I did, that my brother did, addresses a lot of these issues, but this thing is not going to get fixed other than building it from the ground up from scratch. You're not going to take this, the healthcare in this country is so dysfunctional, so revenue oriented, so corrupt, so I don't know what, that anything that you do is putting a patch here, putting your finger in the dike there, things like that. Band-aids, if you will, which may go to solve more immediate problems, but in terms of the shift, the change that you actually talked about in your question, I think it's going to take a generation. And it's going to be up to Anastasia, Jenna, Maddie, Ben. It's going to be I'm going to be gone in probably 10 years, if not sooner.
You have longer than that.
Well, whatever. My point is, shit rolls downhill, and the boomer generation is basically thrown into the laps of their kids and their grandchildren.
I'm gonna put a reminder that we are recording these, and so they will what age
Yeah,
group
well,
we
as somebody said earlier, at this age, I don't give a shit.
There's
also,
a lot
last
of,
I wanted to point
a
out
lot of
that Jenna
equal
had something
references.
I'm sorry, you should have hit the buzzer on that note. Sorry.
Jenna, I wanted to give you space. You had your hand up for a while too.
Okay. Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, I think I just feel like when I was listening to it, and I guess we're kind of like a few topics maybe past, but when I think about the whole situation, I think the hardest part for me was going to places and the doctors like MD saying, well, yeah, you've had a brain injury. Of course that's your problem. But it was very hard for someone to say, like, these rehab things are available. And so if I could pass that on to make it more available for people who are brain injured, and I keep reiterating this, to know those resources exist, because I feel like in the medical community, they're like, you're brain injured and that's the end of it. There's no luck for you. And just live with it. And I think that the thing is like, there's so many wonderful skills through speech therapy and occupational therapy and all these different therapies that they're kind of hidden behind closed doors. I think just generally there's just a lack of understanding that maybe you can't go back to where you were, but you still have a ways somewhere else you can go. And that seems to be lacking right now in the community. Like, it's just kind of like, you're this person, that's who you're always going to be. So I think letting people know that you can do more things, like maybe you're not going to do X, Y, and Z anymore, but it doesn't mean you don't have the rest of the alphabet to play with. And being supported on that journey, I think, is really important.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a huge.
Daniel, you muted yourself, I think.
Did you hear me earlier?
No, repeat that.
I was just gonna say, I've met therapists that really get it as well, and the therapist I had, she was instrumental in my recovery. The funny thing is, she didn't get a lot of what I was talking about, and a lot of what I was dealing with, and we would argue. Eventually, I stopped arguing, and I just kind of kept it all to myself. And then her daughter had a brain injury about 10 years later, and then she really understood it a lot more. So I think there's just a need to educate. Certain therapists, certain clinicians get it, and others don't. And so somehow we have to try to push that forward, push that awareness, to try to expand it and try to help them somehow gain it. I don't know about the whole system as Randy discussed, but yeah, it does make sense that there's a lot of issues. I know that certain therapies, the amount of time has been cut down for what insurance will give you. And I know that for me, it really took 7 years. Maybe at the 3-year mark, I could have been more left on my own, but within the first few years, the drastic changes, it just takes a lot of time to recover. There's no rush. There's no way to rush it, I don't think.
No, I wish there was.
Ben added, so what I'm hearing is that the power to change lies with us. As survivors, we can push for develop ways to inform others about the supports that do exist. And I would say that are needed still too.
Mm-hmm.
And the potential that things can change, because I had also heard a lot that you're stuck. That's, there's no hope. And I think the hope is what drives you to want to change. And if you can do something once, then you can learn it. It's just going to take a long time. And also having our friends and family and people around us understand that more, I think, is very important.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic thing. Or Lori, you had one more thing you wanted to add?
Oh, I don't want to have the last word. I can save it for later.
If you want to add something.
Okay, well, I just want to say, on a note of hope, for me, and I think our wider community, right now, actually, we're writing this proposal to be submitted to the Administration for Community Living for Oregon's Traumatic Brain Injury Partnership Grant. It's not a research grant, it's an advocacy grant. And this year's application mandated that like 50% minimum membership of our advisory board needs to be those who have the lived experience of brain injury. And we met that during this current funding cycle, but I will tell you in terms of just the enormous, I can't even begin to tell you what the impact has been, that shift in thinking at the federal level is trickling down to some meaningful change that gives me hope that, and then when I listen to groups like this and I think, okay, we are all onto something, and it's grassroots, and it's starting to come from a top down, and we'll just keep leaning in.
I love that.
And working together. And so I'm hopeful.
And I'm adding one last thing before I do my closing statement, but Nancy was asking if we could have just a quick introduction to Siebert. For those.
Oh, sure.
And I do have a parting joke for you guys today, so go ahead.
Okay.
So in short, Siebert stands for Center on Brain Injury Research and Training. We are an institute that sits within the Department of Psychology at the University of Oregon. And as the title suggests, we conduct research projects, but of a very applied and practical kind. And then also training to providers, inclusive of survivors, family members, and so forth. So that webinar we mentioned earlier by Dr. Caitlin Sinovac, a behavioral health OT with lots of experience working with people from at-risk groups, particularly those who are homeless, who are high prevalence rate of brain injury. That's the kind of thing that we do. Yeah.
When is that, Lori?
The webinar is this Wednesday. She actually had to pre-record her speech today, but she will be available for live Q&A on Wednesday. And I'll try to find the flyer and stick it in the chat while Anastasia closes. So you all have that, because you can go back and watch all the previous webinars too by Drs. Corrigan, Carolyn Lemsky, and so forth. So let me figure out how to do that while you all wrap up. But thanks for asking. I'm glad I got to share that with you.
I was also just going to add that I'm so going back to what Dr. Turkstra said earlier, I'm so impressed by everybody's executive function and all of our stamina throughout this was a long day. But I more specifically want to say and give appreciation for the executive function for organizing the majority of this, Daniel, and for in and out the entire
Absolutely.
I would agree. Daniel, I think you did an amazing job on this. Nice job.
Daniel.
We're all clapping hands for you, Daniel.
We are. We're all clapping. He really can't see it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I was
ready. Let me know when you're ready for the joke.
Sorry, say that again.
I was trying to do this. I was just gonna say, I was trying to do this all this stuff, and my wife's like, "Are you happy?" And I was like, "No, I don't know. I just need to do this." But thank you. I do feel appreciated and I guess happy about this. And it's there's so much that needs to get out there, and it really hurts me that it isn't out there. So this is a great start, and let's keep this going. And I'm glad. I feel like I'm so sorry I missed Dr. Turkstra's talk, or at least the first half of it. But it sounds like, and I think everything has been amazing, and the way everything's come together has been really amazing. So thank you all for being a part of it.
Yeah,
this is great.
So you can watch.
Anastasia, can you email out the link for however you access the recording of all this?
If you find the flyer with the link to the recordings, if you wanted to email that to me, I could send it to everybody.
Find what flyer?
The flyer to the talks.
I can email it to you. I sent it, and I'll send it to you again. But yeah, there's a flyer.
I don't know if I have it or not.
I think we're talking about, Randy, are you asking about the links to the Siebert talks?
Yeah, no, the link for the webinar on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then the link on how to access the recording of today's session.
Yes, I will make sure you get for sure ours. Lori, I don't know if you wanted to send me the link and then I can just send it to this group here.
Yeah, I'll send the flyer. I can't seem to get it into the chat. I don't know what I'm doing. So I'll just send it to you, Anastasia, and thank you all for.
I have your email for sure, so I'll make sure to send that to you guys, and then we'll send everybody who registered, which was almost 100 people.
Yay!
So yeah, while people were
in and
out.
You ready for today's joke?
One more comment. The chat takes a link or a short number of characters, And so if you were trying to put the whole flyer in without a link, that's probably why it didn't work.
I'm gonna just really quickly say thanks, everybody. I'm gonna stop recording.